Ladies and gentlemen, we have a real treat in store on Sportswire Radio, sportnarium.com/player, and also Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube, because our guest here tonight is somebody I've really been excited to speak with, and I've wanted to speak with him now for a while here because I had heard his interview, which everybody is talking about, of course, on Guiding Light Radio with Mr. Guiding Light, Isaiah Quinn himself, of course, who's been a part of the Sportswire radio family with his brand new show, and really, really excited about his journey. Obviously, in the professional wrestling world, he's all over the place. You can catch him in different podcasts and different things talking about wrestling, but he's been a huge part of Pinfall Pro Wrestling over the past several years. He's also now part of Top Rope Wrestling and Unstoppable Wrestling, and he's obviously been by the side of the likes of Sheik El Sham. I'm really looking forward to speaking about him as well, and really, really excited about this guy because he's really one of the premier professional wrestling managers around, and I don't think there's too many that can speak as good as him. So, ladies and gentlemen, without further ado, here on the Sports Report, the number one global sports show pro wrestling manager, Tom McManus. My friend, welcome aboard.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure. Very nice. Well, that was a fantastic intro. That was better than the ring announcers over here.
I've gotten that quite a bit now that I'm doing this for 3 years, and we've been doing these intros for pretty much 2.5 years, and I do them all the time because we don't just do professional wrestling. I have a background in news and sort of journalism, and I have a background in other sports and universities here in America, and I've just decided, you know what? We're just doing it with everybody. We do it with wrestling, obviously, because we're very big with professional wrestling, but I just do it with everybody at this point, and it's obviously a real treat to have you because I've heard you, obviously, as we alluded to it with the Guiding Light Isaiah Quinn and Guiding Light Radio, and I see you all over the place. And for those that are watching and listening to Tom McManus for the first time, set the tables for us. And what got you into professional wrestling?
So I don't really have the story of like watching it as a kid. I never really followed it as a kid. I got into watching wrestling because when I went to university over in the UK, my two roommates who had come up with me through I don't know how you know the school system works in the UK.
I do actually, believe it or not.
Yeah, college is like
16 to 17, and universities at 18.
So the people I'd come with from college, we were all living together in the shared accommodation, and two of the guys from that were massive wrestling fans. And I think I was just bored one night and wandered in while they were watching wrestling, and I think it was Hell in a Cell 2013, and it was the final minutes of the main event from that. So it was Daniel Bryan and Randy Orton.
I remember
Shawn Michaels was the special guest referee, and I think I caught the last 10 minutes of that. And I was like, what is this? I don't understand how this works. And then I started watching it with them because I was a bit intrigued by it, and also they had it on all the time. And it was just things like they were doing things like going through WrestleManias. They were starting from like WrestleMania 1 and watching all the way through. So then I got introduced to people like Savage and Hogan and stuff like that. And it just built from there. It was just I love history, and wrestling's got so much history to it. So it was like a new learning process, and I understood it. Like I got it very quickly because I always had a background in sort of theatre stuff. I was trying to do comedy at the time as well, and I was sort of like performing was very much like a part of me, and I understood the performance element of it, and it sunk in for me very quickly.
It's funny you said about how your friends went back and watched WrestleMania 1 to where it led up, which would have been WrestleMania 30, 2014, yes. Going into that. So as a kid growing up in the late 90s, early 2000s, I remember my brother went and rented, this was when we had VHSs. I know it sounds like a relic, but this was 20 years ago, we still had VHSs. So I remember my brother going and eventually renting, but wound up buying like all of the WrestleManias from WrestleMania 1 to WrestleMania 14, which was Austin and Michaels. And that's what we did. We just binge watched every WrestleMania, whether it was WrestleMania 1, WrestleMania 2. I mean, there were certain WrestleManias that I liked more than others.
Yeah.
WrestleMania 8 was one of my favorites for whatever reason because of Flair and Savage and Hogan and Justice and Warrior coming back. And I always liked WrestleMania 13 between Austin and Bret Hart, and the I Quit match, and WrestleMania 12. But the fact of the matter is, even though you started out later in life, you still had the same experiences.
Yeah.
But I'm curious about that, though. And we'll get into, obviously, everything you're doing now. But I'm curious because a lot of wrestlers that we have come on, or even personalities like an Isaiah Quinn, it was like, oh, I knew from when I was like 10 years old and 11 years old that I was going to like pro wrestling. And we've even had on the likes of Two Bit and Will Carter and Lucas Neon. And it was like they were 4 years old, 5 years old. They knew that they Lucas Neon was basically a baby born into wrestling, right? So you're the complete opposite. You're pretty much, you're going into university and it's like all of a sudden you discovered wrestling. Not to say that you didn't know what it was, but it was almost like you were just in the bliss. You were just like, it kind of like just, you were oblivious to it. I mean, talk to me about that experience when people all of a sudden saw you now as this big wrestling guy when, you know, at an older age in life, that's when you got into it compared to most everybody else.
Yeah, I think a lot of people thought I was just having a phase, and that I was.
I'm still in a phase, man. I'm still in a phase.
Yeah, I think there was like, I think my parents in particular were a bit concerned that I was that wrestling was sort of like code for his a wacky backy sessions or something like that. Yeah, but no, it was just genuine. I just loved the performance of it, like the structure of it. I just found it so, when it was good, I just found it easy to work out why it was good. And I had always sort of, from a performance standpoint, there was stuff like, I felt like I was like, right, okay, because they've done that and stuff like that. I was never particularly able to do that with comedy stuff. Like it never truly ever really clicked for me with comedy, in terms of actually going out and doing performing in comedy. And I found myself becoming very, very distant from comedy because I just didn't understand how it was working. I didn't particularly enjoy the scene. And then I just saw more and more of wrestling, and I just started to like it even more. There was never a turn off point. There was never a point where I went, oh, this is kind of naff, that this happens. But I was always like, that's interesting. It was just the reason I've stuck at it for so long is because wrestling interests me. It constantly interests me and finds new ways to keep my interest.
It's funny that you said that about comedy because I have a friend right now and he's trying stand-up comedy for whatever reason. I didn't plan we're going to talk about this, but
Yeah.
I have a friend of mine who's kind of like, how can I put it, socially weird, and he's kind of weird. I know he's not listening to this, so I can say it out there. But like, I was watching him perform, and I looked at like some of like the crowd and like the other comedians, and it was like he didn't have it. Like he was trying, and he was trying too hard, and God bless him. You know, he's had a lot of other things going on. Then I had a friend maybe about 10 or 11 years ago try the scene in Manhattan here in New York, and he tried it, and it was like, like, and like the friend today, same thing. So I kind of think doing comedy is very hard, and I think it's a lot harder than people realize, because when you go up there, you have 5 minutes. Like my friend, he showed me the video. It's 5 minutes, and it's like, yeah, okay, yeah. Like he was awkward in his intro. His closing was sort of okay. Middle part, he had one good joke, but but with wrestling, you kind of get everything incorporated into it. Wrestling, to me, it's almost like, to use the term they used to use in the Attitude Era, crash TV. You could do one thing and move on to another thing. And you know what? It all works. Whereas I think sometimes, in anything else in life, like comedy, you get pigeonholed. Maybe that's why you also got into professional wrestling, because you got violence, you got comedy, you got sort of the drama, you got sort of those like tense moments. You have everything again, kind of like crash TV. I mean, is that kind of fair also?
I think that's actually a very fair assessment, to be fair. I think part of the thing that makes wrestling as sort of varied as it is you're right. You're not pigeonholed into something. You can have those moments where it's more of a sort of like flare of creativity, and if it doesn't necessarily work the first time, you can actually sit back and take away. It doesn't necessarily ruin the gig. If you have a bad joke in comedy, that's it. You have to recover from that. If you do something that doesn't necessarily work, you can always just pass it out off as something else. If you try and kick someone and fall over, you can pass that off as comedy. Or if you try and fall over and it ends up looking like a reasonably violent spot, you can pass it off as violence. You've got that protection in there with what you're doing. So yeah, I think that's a very fair assessment.
Yeah, because I feel like when you do comedy, you have like your first impression, you're pigeonholed already.
Yes.
Because I've watched my friend, and again, I'm not gonna name his name, but I've seen his stuff. He sent me his videos, and it's like, yeah, like he's like I'm trying to say he's not that funny. I don't
Yeah.
want to tell him that, but I feel like with wrestling, though, listen, something bad could go happen, but you could actually make it work and make it into your own. That's why I think professional wrestling, you've done kind of a good job at that, and that's why it's appealed to you. So I almost have to ask you, Tom, before we lead up into where you are today with Pinfall Pro Wrestling, I mean, who are some of those wrestlers or even now some of those managers that you looked upon and said, okay, you know what? I'm going to go into wrestling. I'm going to do this. Here's the people that I might aspire to be.
So in the early days of people that I watched a lot of Punk when I was. You were obviously when I started watching, you were coming off the tail end of Punk's WWE run.
Yeah.
I was instantly
literally the end of his run, like literally
right at the end. Yeah, I was very drawn to Punk from the get go. I loved his stuff. I loved his matches. I loved his promos. I was really when we were watching the stuff. I was really drawn to Savage because of the flair of it all. I was a big Randy Savage fan. Got very acclimatized to Shawn Michaels as well. I was very much a big sort of flary wrestler. Watched a bit of Flair as well, but now I'm sort of like. Then I think Heyman would have been the first manager that I saw.
Heyman was like the only manager in that era.
Because he was the only manager that was really.
I mean, Vicky Guerrero, if you
TV.
count.
Yeah, but she was doing the GM role at that time.
Yeah.
So I was sort of like, obviously there was people like that as well, in regards to stuff. So I will say that I don't listen to him and I don't watch him anymore. Because I don't agree with a lot of what he says, but I was very drawn to Cornette when I started watching older stuff.
Sure.
I think it's fair to say, like, I mean, people may use it as a criticism. They may say it as just an observation. It's probably fair to say that I was doing a lot of Cornette style stuff when I started out because I was very drawn to how he worked.
You didn't have the tennis racket, that I know.
I didn't have the tennis racket. I brought it once to a show. I brought a tennis racket once to a show just because it was a Halloween show, and I thought, you know what? If an opportunity comes up, why not? I can say I've done it. That's half of the reason why I'm doing it, just so I can say I've done it. I don't necessarily follow much of him anymore. What people I really follow at the moment, I'm crazy for watching JJ Dillon's old stuff. I think he's such an underrated manager in terms of how he doesn't gets. But I think he's a Mount Rushmore manager for me.
You know what? He was. You know what? I think he got lost in the shuffle because he was a backstage guy for so long.
Yeah,
and people kind of forget about the old NWA with that. It's
I think as well. I think it's part of the fact that he was the warm-up guy for the Horsemen, and that in itself was such an important job, and he was so good at it. And that, in essence, is what a manager should be. You should be a warm-up guy for the person that you're bringing out for whoever you're managing at that time. That's who you should be. Like, obviously, it's different if you're working with someone that's a little bit greener than yourself in regards to everything. But again, you still should be trying to eventually pass the spotlight onto that person and let them have their moment to shine. And I just think, for me, JJ Dillon was one of the best guys at doing that. So I watch a lot of his stuff now, because I really, really like the way that he works as a manager.
It's funny you said that, because when we had the guiding light Isaiah Quinn on, we've gotten to know Quinn quite a bit over the past year. That's exactly what he said the last time we had him on, is that you don't want to get yourself the spotlight too much, because if you're managing your wrestler, you need to make sure that they have the recognition, they have the attention, whether they're a good character or a bad character. You want to make sure that you're getting them over more than you are, because you don't want it to be where everybody's focused on you, because that's hurting them. So it's sort of like a tightrope, more or less. So I could clearly see why JJ Dillon would be an influence, because he was a background guy, but still was a very, very important manager. And that also brings me a bit to where we are today with Pinfall Pro Wrestling, where you've been a huge part of that. And obviously, Sheik El Sham, you've been a huge part of. So set the tables for me in Pinfall Pro Wrestling and your involvement in that, and just everything that you've done there with the company so far.
Yeah, so Pinfall was my first promotion. It used to be called Wrestle Pro. Back in the day. It was where basically their school started up across the road from like my last university house. So I think someone had been to see. Yeah, someone had been to see. We'd been to see a Wrestle Pro show, the first Wrestle Pro show, and we were like, "This must be local." And then someone went to see William Regal's show at the Frog and Bucket, and they said they'd heard about some Wrestle Pro stuff being run through there, and that's where they'd got the address. And we were all sort of talking about going down just to see it, just to try it, because I think I'd been thinking about it. I knew when I left uni, I knew I didn't want to do any more comedy stuff. I knew I was done with comedy. I knew I wanted to try my hands at different sort of elements. And I was like, yeah, if there's wrestling schools, I may as well try and find one and see what happens, just for the case. But I knew I didn't want to be a wrestler. I knew I wanted to either be someone that was backstage, or I wanted to be a manager, involved in some kind of creative thing. So I went to... I'd originally reached out to PCW, but it just wasn't feasible at that time. I couldn't make the trip from Manchester to Preston. I didn't have the money for it. So it just wasn't feasible for me. And then Wrestle Pro opened up. So I went to see them, got talking with them. I met Nick, the promoter. And to be fair, me and Nick just sort of hit it off. He was very new to promoting. I was new to wrestling in general. So we were talking about ideas. I had time because I was coming towards the end of uni. So we'd basically just sort of sit in the gym and just bat ideas around about like what this promotion could sort of be going forward. And then I've just always sort of like done jobs behind the scenes at Wrestle Pro and Pinfall, while also then just getting a chance to develop on shows as a manager. I was the ring announcer for a bit, and then we started working as a manager. And then I've just been there. It's been my home. It's been my home promotion for must be about 4 or 5 years now.
You've done some different roles, and I'll get to the Sheik in a few minutes. But you said a few different things, and I find them interesting, because we had on a professional wrestler in the state of Florida the other night, and we had asked him some different things and how he got into wrestling, and he talked about some different things that were kind of similar to you in a sense. But talk to me about how important some of those other things that you've done, in addition to the capacity that you are on screen, have maybe helped you in terms of maybe learning the professional wrestling business and maybe becoming very successful at it.
Oh, it's been immensely rewarding, and I've been really, really fortunate, to be fair, just to be trusted to be in some of the like I've done realistically probably almost every job you can do backstage, more or less. With WrestlePro and Pinfall, I've sat down and helped with the booking. I've done the formatting for shows. Um, I, I've I've helped sort some of the editing. I don't think I've ever actually done the editing, but I've done the actual some of the timekeeping stuff. Sort of like every sort of job that you can have, sort of like putting things together, putting the cards together, and just doing some sort of like day-to-day management. I mean, it's helped me in ways in the fact that I've got transferable skills from it into my own life. It's helped me become obviously a more confident person doing stuff like that in terms of running stuff. But it's like for wrestling, you can't. I don't think you can get a greater understanding of how it works than putting an idea together and then putting it on a show and then watching that play out that was your idea and seeing whether it worked or didn't work. I don't think there's a better experience than that to actually learn. It's unfortunate that not a lot of people will get to do it because it's a role that's not everyone can be in that role. But for me, I've been so lucky and so fortunate that I have been able to get some experience in doing that. Even running like we used to run shows in like a little mini theme park for sort of like a summer
I saw
period.
some of that.
Yeah,
What was that like?
do you know what? It was so
I
much
couldn't
fun.
imagine that here in New York. I couldn't
They
imagine
were
running a theme park.
it was a really weird experience because it looked so good on paper. And then we got
Logistically,
there.
must have been a nightmare. I have to
Li-
say,
It,
logistically.
it shouldn't have been, but it was made a nightmare for us. We basically we went to a theme park called Gulliver's World in Warrington, just outside of Manchester,
Okay.
and it was basically I think Nick, the promoter at WrestlePro. Oh God, I don't know whether he'll want me to tell this story, but bugger it, I'll do it.
Well, don't do it. It's going to
I'll,
incriminate you.
I'll do
Please
it.
say.
It's nothing incredible. He basically he used to he they stayed over there for like the Winter Wonderland for Christmas time. Him and his daughter and his partner, and I think he ended up getting drunk with the head of entertainment at Gulliver's World and pitched him a wrestling show. And he was like, and the head of entertainment was like, we should do this. This is going to be great. And then carried on messaging him throughout it, um, and organized it. And we sort of, as we were organizing it, it became very apparent that the actual management of the park didn't really want us there. They weren't that interested in a wrestling show, but we were like, if we can make it work, this might be a nice little thing for us. So we tried to make it work. And logistically, every sort of thing was thrown in front of us. Venues weren't ready when we got there to put a ring up in. One time we left the ring up and they decided to take it down without telling us. So we turned up expecting a ring to be put up, and then had like a 2-hour ring job ahead of us and had to like move shows around. But when those shows were good, they were so good because it was a new chance to learn, because we all basically had to teach ourselves camp style wrestling. None of us had ever really done camp style wrestling other than Nick from back in the day when he was wrestling as a teenager. So he sort of taught us and ran us through the formats of that. And there were days where obviously Nick couldn't make it because his life and his work was in the way. So I'd be down running the shows and putting the formats together. Again, it's just new experiences and sort of getting to put everything together. It was a really great experience.
I kind of feel like with professional wrestling that those stuff, whether it's learning how to set up the ring, whether it's learning how to maybe time keep, although very few people have done that, but so that's a tough job in itself, believe it or not. But a lot of these different things in terms of being a professional wrestler, I really think in terms of how can I put it, like your respect toward professional wrestling will help you in the long run because. And I made this comparison when I had spoke with the professional wrestler we had on here Monday night, is that you could play a sport, whether it's football around the world or basketball, and you go to a park, you go to a field, and that's one thing. But with professional wrestling, you really can't do that. You have to kind of like absorb everything around you. And I think like doing these different things, whether it's helping set the ring up and whether it's helping set it, take it down, and whether it's also maybe talking with the different wrestlers and helping them and cleaning up and all these different things. I think it gives you a broader understanding, because I kind of compare professional wrestling to an apprenticeship, whether it's a manager like you or a wrestler like the Sheik. I think it's almost like a trade. You have to learn to hone your craft. It's not like anything else. I mean, do you kind of agree with that assessment, that I kind of find that
Yeah,
the
I think
professional wrestling
I
world is
think definitely the apprenticeship side of things is definitely the case. It's all part of the experience. I mean, I enjoy the traveling just as much as I like getting in a car with a bunch of people. Like, and it doesn't
you really
matter if
like
it's
those
people.
5-6 hour rides?
Well, to be fair, we've never because we're in the UK, we don't necessarily have the 5 or 6 hour rides.
Okay.
I think I've had one where it was like a 4 to 5 hour trip when I worked in Newcastle ages ago. But even that was a fun experience, because it's just you're in a car with a bunch of people that arguably you would never be in that car with if it wasn't for wrestling. Wrestling's the only sort of common denominator that's holding you together in that car, and you have plenty of conversation. Like, I've met so many people that I wouldn't have had any experience of if I hadn't met them through wrestling. So getting those conversations, like traveling back from a show, is one of my favorite experiences, because it's just the conversations that you can have in regards to everything, just talking to people on a level as peers. That's a rewarding experience in itself.
All right, well, you changed my mind a little bit, because I'm thinking,
Hmm.
you got to travel, because you hear wrestlers all the time talking. It's like, oh, I got to make the long drive, and I got to go back, and I don't make any money, and I got gas, and I got this and that. But you know what? In one sense, you always got to take good from something. You always got to learn from your experiences, and clearly you've done a great job with that. And that is why we are very honored to have you on the Sports Report live with us for Sportswire Radio, sportnarium.com/player, YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter. That is Tom McManus, who is doing a phenomenal job for Pinfall Pro Wrestling. Is also a part of Unstoppable and Top Rope Wrestling. So really, really excited to talk about all of the things he's doing in the UK. And I am the host of the Sports Report and the station manager here of Sportswire Radio, the Reverend Tom Bryce. And if you like what you hear from Tom McManus, do give him a follow on Twitter at Tom McWrestle Pro, because I can assure you he's going to be doing some really big things here in 2022. He's going to be a part of some really, really big wrestling companies here. And as we've been talking about the professional wrestling scene in the UK for the past year, the scene has exploded since COVID. So I have a feeling it's going to explode a lot more in 2022. And Tom is going to be a part of that. And if you like what you hear from us on Sportswire Radio, give us a like and follow on Facebook at Sportswire Radio. And 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year, you can listen to all of our great content on sportnarium.com/player, where before we came live here, we had the Guiding Light Radio one, where he was speaking with Tony Wright, another guy that had a comedic background in a sense. So obviously, really, really excited to have the Guiding Light. Isaiah Quinn, though, as a part of the station, as a part of the team. So that was our lead in. We have many other great shows. We have a live DJ that comes on here Friday nights, 8 p.m. British Standard Time. So really, really excited about that. But most importantly, I am very excited to be speaking with Tom McManus, who is doing a phenomenal job here as one of the premier pro wrestling managers around, not just in the UK, but everywhere. Listen, Don Callis called us. We didn't want him. Listen, Vicky Guerrero called us. We didn't want it. Ric Flair even said, hey, I'm available. I'm doing podcasts now. I'm with Conrad Hobbs. We said, no, thanks. We want Tom McManus, because Tom has got a story that I can assure you is one that I'm very, very excited to get further into. Tom, we've been teasing it. Sheik El Sham, I see him everywhere. My goodness. I mean, how many championships has he held at this point? I mean, I've lost count. He is everywhere. He is one of the guys, when I think about the professional wrestling scene in the UK over the past several years, he's clearly at the top of my list. Talk to me about the Sheik. Talk to me about his success and what he's been like.
Shake is someone that I'm so privileged to have met through pro wrestling. He is exactly what you want when you think of the word pro wrestler. I don't think I have to say I think there are very few people in the UK that understand pro wrestling as well as he does. That understand, like, every facet of pro wrestling. Shake gets it. He's a phenomenal talent, and working with him, like I don't think I'd be half the manager I am today without working with him. True, like almost so many things that I've learned through working with him have been things that I can apply into other situations. And yeah, no, I'm tremendously privileged to know Sheikh. He's a phenomenal talent, phenomenal talent.
How has he been so successful in your opinion? Because he's done so many different big matches. He's been involved in so many different things. It's literally everywhere. I mean, all you have to do is look him up and you see so many of his clips on YouTube. And he's really one of those guys, you look at him and you almost say to yourself, well, this guy, he has to be really, really in one of the major companies. I mean, he almost to me looks like straight out of Central Casting. I mean, what do you take away from how he's been able to do this?
Well, I think it's two things. I think one is the fact that he understands professional wrestling. He understands the core and the basics of professional wrestling almost, if not better than anyone else. I think he has a very logical mindset that helps him really get to grips with pro wrestling. And I think the second thing is he knows when to ask for help. He knows when to ask for feedback. He knows who to ask for feedback. He knows who to speak to. He knows who's going to give him the best critique of his matches in regards to it. And he actually listens and applies that when people do critique his matches. He's constantly he's constantly there have been so many times where I've turned around to him and he's been like, give me feedback on matches. He's turned around and said, like, what did you think of the match? What do you think? Where I've turned around and I've said to him, like, sometimes I think you have to turn around and say to yourself, that was a good show, that was a good match. He will not accept that. He will go out and look for the tiniest flaw, and rather than let it eat him up, he'll go out and improve on that flaw. He won't let that flaw stay there. He will go and get rid of it. It doesn't matter how tiny it is. It could be that his foot's a centimeter out of position. He'll go and fix that on the next match. He's just got a brilliant mindset for how this works.
Do you think that the certain wrestlers that almost have that it factor or kind of have maybe that potential to do big things, and the Sheik is obviously in that category?
Absolutely.
Do you think that separates them from, let's say, how can I put it, almost like maybe those weekend warrior types that it's like, yeah, I'm a wrestler and I wrestle Saturdays or a Sunday once or twice a month, and that's what they are, right? But with the Sheik, he's almost, how can I steal a phrase from Lex Luger, the total package. He's got everything about him. And clearly, from what you're saying, he's only going to get even better and even bigger, which is a scary thought because look at where he's been and where he is right now. So do you almost think, in a sense, that there's a certain factor that certain wrestlers have that allows them to maybe move up versus those who might just be, I'm doing it as a hobby, and no disrespect to them because it's still tough to go out there and compete. Make that clear here. But talk to me about your thoughts on that.
I don't know if the wording of that is necessarily how I agree exactly. I think there is something that separates the Sheik. I think it's probably more the way that he processes stuff. I think you can still look at something as a hobby and still do it better than people are potentially doing it out there, who are people who would say we're the hustlers, we're the people. I think it's more your mindset. I think it's more your logical thinking in regards to everything. I've always said that until I get a contract placed in front of me that says this is going to make you financially secure, wrestling is a hobby to me. Wrestling will always be a hobby to me until someone gives me something financially secure. I don't think that's what separates me from people who are possibly making more money than me in regards to pro wrestling. I don't think that I wouldn't say that I necessarily am less capable of viewing how wrestling should work because of them. I think it comes down to your critical thinking and your logical, and whether you can take a step back and look at what you're doing and being like, is this good enough? Is
Okay.
this in this moment? Is this good enough? And I think that's something that separates Shake from a lot of other people.
Okay, that and a lot of that stuff again
Mm.
can clearly see very valid and very fair points, and you know about this stuff because well you're in the professional wrestling world, so I'm gonna definitely agree with you because well you're out there and you're doing it, and you see all these different talent. But I'm also curious about Pinfall Pro Wrestling before I move on to some of the other companies you're working with at the moment. Talk to me about a few other wrestlers that we should keep an eye on here when the company returns in March. That maybe for those who are watching and listening to this for the first time are hearing about Pinfall Pro Wrestling, they should go out and check out and, maybe follow.
I think we've got a fair few coming through. In regards to everything, I think we've got a lad that's been with us for a fair while. Who's always been doing stuff by the name of Alex Boylan. I think he's taken a lot of time to re-examine himself over the COVID period and try and make a few changes to how he's presenting himself in the ring. He's given himself a completely new outlook on everything. I think he's going to be something that's definitely worth taking a look at in regards to stuff. We've got a gentleman called the Rarebit, who the only way I can describe is just an experience. You have to see him to understand him, and even then, you probably won't understand him. He's always been phenomenally entertaining. He's worked hard over COVID to put himself in the best shape of his life, incredibly good shape. So I think he's going to be fantastic. There's a lot of people that we're bringing through that we've just sort of been working quietly with for the last year and a half, I'd say, and I think there's too many to mention at the moment in terms of what we're going to do, but I think you're slowly going to see a filtering in of new talent through to Pinfall, and I think each of them are going to bring something nice and new to the table, and really create a buzz around the scene.
Absolutely, and really, really excited about all the great things that is going on with Pinfall Pro Wrestling. And I want to give them a shout out because you can also follow them on Twitter at Pinfall Pro. So it's pretty easy, pretty simple, Pinfall Pro, and keep up to date with all the great things that the company is doing. You can also go to pinfallwrestling.com and find out more information. So really, really excited about that. And we'll promote something toward the end of the show that's kind of a tie-in to Pinfall Pro Wrestling.
Yes.
So we'll make sure toward the end. We always like to make sure when we do these that we promote what's going on, because sometimes I hear different people do podcasts and they have different wrestlers on, and all they want to talk about is WWE. I say to myself, listen, I can listen to anybody talk about WWE. I want to hear about what's going on about Pinfall Pro Wrestling and everything else, but also, I'm very curious because we haven't got a chance to talk about these companies here in the UK because we've done a lot with obviously Odyssey and KOW and the LWF and to a lesser extent BWR, but also talk to me about your work with Top Rope and Unstoppable Wrestling because I'm curious about them personally because those are companies that we really haven't got a chance to talk about much here. So talk to me about those companies and your work with them.
Yeah, so Top Rope is a promotion that's running off Top Rope Wrestling Academy, which is Sheikh Al Sham's school that he opened towards the beginning of last year. They're doing very exciting stuff. I've been very lucky to get to do the shows with those guys. They're very kind enough to have me on as sort of like train when they run their training events. It's just very like obviously part of it is the fact that I'm very privileged in the fact that Sheikh trusts me to go out and work with some of the newer guys and some of the less experienced folk, purely just due to the fact that I might not be the most experienced person in the world, but I have got almost 5 years of this under my belt. I've got 5 years of show experience, so I there are certain things that I can do and sort of talk about in regards to the developing of people. So I've been really privileged to work with I've been working with a tag team there called Death Row. Those guys are gonna be great fun. I think when they come out, they're doing really good stuff on PCW at the moment. Very unorthodox, very violent tag team.
Well, the name's Death
really good
Row.
fun.
When you think about
They've got to be. You've got to be violent in
I mean,
that
listen, Death Row
situation.
Records. I mean, seriously, if they're not violent, they're called Death Row. I'd say, listen, that really is a joke. You're playing a joke on us there, Tom.
Yeah, I'm working with a newer lad by the name of Jordan Kane as well. Primetime Jordan Kane. Doing sort of like a man of all talents athlete style gimmick. He's relatively new. I think he's only got a couple of actual like show matches under his belt. I think I've done two matches with him now, and he's someone I'm very interested in. He's someone I'm very heavily invested in. I think in a couple of years this guy could be the guy. I think there's a few ways to go. I think we need to really hammer down the look of the gimmick that he's got at the moment, and get him out there in something that he feels comfortable in. But when I watch this guy in matches, something's clicking. Something is clicking with this guy, and I'm very excited to carry on working with Jordan Kane. That
reminds me at the end of WCW, there was a wrestler very similar to what you just said about Primetime Jordan Kane called Primetime Elite Skipper. And this guy was like, he was versatile. He was, I guess, kind of a cruiserweight, but he could pretty much do everything in the ring. He unfortunately was at WCW toward the tail end of WCW. But this guy could move. He could go. He was ironically a part of Team Canada when Lance Storm had that little group for a while. And just that's what it exactly reminded me of. So Primetime Jordan Kane is a guy we're going to remember here. And we're going to definitely look forward to watching him on the tape and watching a lot of what he brings to the table, because you reminded me of 20 plus years ago now with Primetime Elite Skipper. So I'm going to definitely now keep that in the mind here. So we're very, very excited about that. And again, shout out to the Sheikh for giving back, and obviously with his wrestling school and all the great things there. So I have a feeling that those talent are going to learn, especially from not only you, but also the Sheikh himself. But speaking of learning real quick, I wanted to congratulate you on your masters. I mean, that's a hard thing to achieve. I mean, I wasn't going to ask, but I'm like, you know what? I got to bring it up. I mean, listen, the guy got a master's. I was lucky if I could get past like the 5th grade, and you here you are, and you have a master's. I mean, I got to congratulate you on that recently.
Oh, thank you very much, man. Yeah, no, it was it was a nice experience to turn around and do it. I'd been thinking about doing it for a while, and I was then I'd ended up in a job that was a job that basically had an end date because there was a redundancy package promised to me.
Sure.
That had sort of the redundancy package had been delayed a couple of times, but they'd been moving the site I was working on over to a site in Wales, and it'd taken them a lot longer to move on, so I'd had to put it back a year or two to get the to leave with the redundancy package, so I could be financially comfortable while I did the masters. But yeah, no, it's a really great experience. I'm hoping to get some more stuff out of it. Got the chance to do a lot of writing. Hopefully it might lead to doing some projects outside of wrestling. So I'm very, very calmly sort of getting things ready on the back burner there as well.
Well, we'll definitely congratulate you. We'll leave the non-wrestling stuff for another time and maybe off the air. But in all seriousness, congratulations on that. It's a tremendous accomplishment. And I'm sure you are going to do big things, especially in the wrestling world and everything else you're doing. But speaking of writing and such, and sort of ties into some of the things we've talked about, and I hear you're a great speaker. You've obviously been all over the place. We'll get into maybe some of the appearances that sort of ties in with Mr. Quinn in a second. But I kind of feel like if you're a professional wrestler, you have to be able to speak. I know you're a great mouthpiece. I know that you're a great manager. But I speak with different people all the time, and it's all over the place. And I feel like in order to really get to the level of, let's say, where the Sheikh is, or anybody else. RPD is a good friend of the station, and we have him on all the time, and to an extent, Quinn. And I feel like that you have to be able to talk from your vantage point, because obviously you've talked about all these different capacities you've been a part of. You're now helping out at the school with the Shake. Obviously, some of your roles with Unstoppable, even with those wrestlers that you're training with, and maybe wrestlers that are colleagues of yours. Talk to me on how important that is to be able to promote yourself and to become somebody that can do good promos.
Yeah, I think it's a lost art, a little bit, just in the sense of how we communicate on social media at the moment. I think realistically, it's probably more important to be social media savvy, which I am not, because I just don't have the time for it. So I think it's a bit more important nowadays to be good at social media and to try and find your hook through social media. Whether it actually comes to talking, there'll always be someone who can do the talking and stuff like that. And if you're not a good talker, there are always ways around that. I think it's more important to find your character, to find your personality, in regards to everything. I mean, if you look at, take an example. I mean, this is probably a poor example because he's so dated. But also he's one of the all-time greats in my opinion. Look at Bobby Eaton, like
Sure,
God rest his soul. Bobby Eaton, guy. I don't think the guy ever said a word in his entire life on NWA TV. But the guy had character. The guy had he's in
I
the
think was it
background of all
Stone
his...
Cold that said he was like one of the greatest wrestlers to ever lace up a pair of boots. I think it was him and Chris Adams, the gentleman Chris Adams. I think it was.
Oh, he's absolutely got to be one of the ones considered. But look at what there's a promo. I think it's from either 88 or 87, and it's Dusty Rhodes doing the promo. Because the Express and all of the Cornette style of things are feuding with Dusty Rhodes, going to be like, we're going to retire Dusty Rhodes. And he's talking through the chain of command, and he's like, Mama talks to Cornette, Cornette talks to Bubba, Bubba talks to Bobby Eaton. Bobby Eaton doesn't talk, so Bubba has to talk to Stan Lane as well. And it's like, but it's still like Bobby Eaton was still one of those guys. He was still the He was still the guy. He still had so much character to him and stuff like that. That there are ways that if you are not necessarily the greatest public speaker in the world, obviously we can find ways to teach you, but let's find your character as well. Let's find what makes you personable. Let's find what makes you either endearing or the way that people will hate you in the ring, in regards to everything. I don't think it's necessary. Can you talk for a long time? Because anyone feasibly can talk for a long time, but it's whether you're actually finding something to say with your words, as well.
No, I think there's no question that if you're a great wrestler and you can wrestle, you could probably get away with it to an extent. I mean, Bret Hart used to hate cutting interviews and doing promo. It took him a long time. That's why I used to always see the glasses on, because he was so nervous. He would talk about the fact that he would basically like clench up. He would sweat. He just, over time, yes, he became a good enough talker. But listen, not everybody's Ric Flair that could talk a broom off the ledge. I mean, not everybody's even a Savage. I mean, Savage could go on and on and on and on. Or a Dusty's an example. I mean, so there are Bobby Eatons, and Shelton Benjamin to me is another example of a great wrestler that probably didn't have maybe the most notable mic skills, but their wrestling spoke for themselves. So I could certainly see some of the things that you're talking about. So, but
that's the thing as well, yeah, because Hart always had character in his voice. Hart was always coming across as like, whenever he said anything, he spoke the truth. He didn't say anything that he didn't actually. You didn't.
Oh, and knowing Bret Hart, yeah,
everything that Bret Hart said, you always believed. Yeah,
Bret Hart was one of those wrestlers that, like, he was Bret Hart like 24/7. There's some wrestlers
Yeah.
that I could say, it's a gimmick, right? They would turn it on, turn it off. No, Bret Hart, like if you hear him speak, since he's obviously been out of the wrestling business, I mean, he's pretty much Bret Hart like 24/7. So
Yeah.
like if you got a Bret Hart promo in like 1991 or 92, that was pretty much Bret Hart speaking. So he was definitely one of those guys that he definitely meant what he said. He really wasn't. Sometimes I speak with wrestlers and they talk about being in character, out of character, and Bret Hart, I kind of have the feeling Tom was always in character. And the story that I'll probably make you chuckle. It's off the topic real quick, and we'll get into some things you're doing as well. But I think it was Scott Hall that said on a podcast I was listening to once, said that Bret Hart, he went to his house, I guess in Calgary, and he was thinking, all right, maybe there's like one or two photos of Bret Hart. It was like the room was like litany of like all the magazines and references and all the different things. So, I mean, there are certain wrestlers that I guess that have that about them, but that's why we love professional wrestlers. Everybody's different, and this is why it makes such a great thing. And I also want to give a shout out to a t-shirt because I'm wearing actually for the Grappling with Canada show. It's actually on Sportswire Radio. I want to give a shout out to the Tax Man because he's somebody that does a documentary literally each show when he goes on about the history of Canadian pro wrestling. So he's not just talking about the Heart Dungeon, Stampede Pro Wrestling. He goes in depth, and I want to give him a shout out. So thank you for the shirt, the Tax Man. And you can follow Grappling with Canada anytime on Twitter at 6_podcast. So make sure you do that and get a cool shirt like the one I'm wearing. So obviously we definitely are international. We like to do international things. We're heard in 13 countries, and Canada obviously is a big part of that, just like the UK. And speaking of big deals, I know once you were part of an Impact press call. I mean, that's a big deal. Impact Pro Wrestling. I mean, you got to talk to me about the Impact press call you were part of at one point.
It's one of them things. I'm so fortunate to have been able to do. Like I've been able to do things that I'd never have been able to do. Realistically, you look at it, it wasn't that much. It was basically just a big Zoom call that I was on. But
everybody's on Zoom though these days, so don't feel bad.
Everything's a Zoom call. I'm so surprised this isn't a Zoom call. Yeah, no, I work with I do some work with a podcast that's mostly based up in Scotland. That I reached out to when they said they were looking for new members, so I just sent them an application off to see like it's just a chance to talk about wrestling. But yeah, they needed someone someone to sit on the inspiration press call, and no one could do it. There's like 20 odd people in this group in this on this podcast, and no one could do it. And I happened to be free on the day, so I just said I'll do it. I've got no journalistic experience whatsoever. So I basically just sat there with my phone on this Zoom call, hoping to get in a question. And I didn't get in there because everyone was asking two questions when they were supposed to ask one. So I got screw jobbed on that one. But yeah, I think I ruined my Twitter because of it, because I live tweeted the whole thing. You know how they do when they're like the journalists. I mean, you'll have seen it from your research. So I was doing that thing of like, this is what journalists do, so I should do it because I'm technically a journalist now. So I was live tweeting the whole thing. And now if you go like a month back in my Twitter, there's just like 30 tweets of me saying like the inspiration said this, Cassie Lee said this, Jessica McKay said this. But yeah, no, it was just a cool experience. It's stuff that I'd never get to do without being part of wrestling.
No, listen, you were still part of it, and that would make for a good like comedy routine. Hey, I'm on this important call, and I've got all these big time wrestlers, and I technically didn't get to ask them anything, but I tweeted the whole thing out. So listen,
I told my mum I was doing it.
All right,
I was like, I'm doing, like, your boy's gone big.
No, listen, I mean, I actually get some of those things all the time. And I actually one time got lucky. I actually got an interview with the, I guess it was the CEO at the time of Fight TV. And for whatever reason, I'm on these different lists. This was actually like 2+ years ago. So my skills have improved so much. And the guy is like, can you do an interview now? And I'm thinking like, yeah, okay. And I was like, I just did it. And it was like, because the guy was like, I got to do it. And he was like, if you do the interview, I'll plug it all over the place. So sometimes one of these things, it's like nature calls and you got the call, and there'll be a next time. Listen, don't worry.
It's the
But
best way to learn. Just throw
yeah.
yourself into something and just
Listen, that's how
and
I
go from
learned.
it.
Listen, it's
Yeah,
like anything else. You have to learn. It's trial by fire, as they would always say. So at the end
yeah.
of the day, I'm sure you'll be on many more calls with Impact. MLW does them. I'm sure you'll be on a Fight TV one. I'm sure you'll find your way to be on them. But most importantly, I know you'll find your way being a part of those companies in terms of being a manager or whatever else. So you
Oh,
might have
thank
been
you,
a journalist. You might have been a journalist for the day, but I have a feeling you'll be a part of those companies one of those days. But speaking of somebody that you've done some work with, and we did some research with our crack staff on, I didn't realize this was going to happen. I actually listened to some of it. You and Mr. Guiding Light Isaiah Quinn actually did a podcast together in the way back in the time machine. So I got to almost ask you then about those experiences doing a podcast with the Guiding Light Isaiah Quinn. And if you ever thought, oh, okay, now he's going to do a podcast years later that's going to be totally different from what you guys did then. I mean, talk to me about that experience of doing a show with Mr. Quinn a few years back.
I'll be really honest. The reason it was an idea I'd had. I knew I wanted to do more media stuff. And I also knew that I really wanted to work with Isaiah.
Can't blame you on that.
Because
Cannot blame you on that.
because he was training with WrestlePro at the time, and he was just so good, and he was just so talented, and I was like, but because he was doing the cult leader gimmick, and I was doing the managing gimmick, we were both two very different heels, and I was like, I'm never gonna get to work with this guy, and I'm gonna kick myself for not getting to work with this guy. So I was like, how else can I find a way to work with this guy? So I was like, just do a podcast about anything, and ask him if he wants to do it. And yeah, it was so much fun because we just enjoyed, because we had like we were trying to do a news show, but I think we just started enjoying it. We just started enjoying being like, it was just us talking with each other for 45 minutes to an hour, and it was just really good fun. Like really good fun. Like we had our little characters on it. I think I was definitely the heel of the show, and it was Isaiah's one chance to work babyface.
Yeah, it was weird hearing Isaiah differently because you know
he was
Isaiah
the
now.
yeah, he was definitely the face of the show. But it was just fun, and it was just getting to work with Isaiah because I'd never would have had the chance to work with him for so long. Very nearly got to manage Isaiah on a show once. But then the venue got shut down because some bouncers kicked a kid's head in. So we couldn't. There was a
hard to hear.
there was a big violence thing all around it, so we couldn't do the show. And I was meant to manage Isaiah on that show, and I just said I'll do the show because it was a charity free show or something like that. I said I'll do it, but I want to manage Isaiah because I'm never going to get to do it anywhere else. So yeah, it was working with Isaiah that was the best part. Yeah.
Well, listen, you guys did have some good back and forth, and I certainly enjoyed the content. And it almost kind of leads me in a way when it comes to Mr. Quinn. I mean, what makes him tick? You've known him for a while, and obviously you know him better than some other people. And I obviously heard you on the show with the Guiding Light, and it really was fascinating to kind of hear you guys back and forth because it did kind of feel that you guys had a certain synergy and a certain chemistry that maybe he didn't have with some of the other guests, and he knew everybody else he was interviewing. But it felt like with you, there was something a little special to it. But talk to me about what makes him tick and why has he been so successful?
I think we've always had a good chemistry with each other ever since doing the podcast. Like we just found it natural. I think when Isaiah's enjoying himself, he's incredibly entertaining, and I think that's the bit when he's not putting any pressure on himself and he's doing it because he's in a comfortable an environment that he's comfortable in. He produces an insane quality of work. I think what it comes down to him, and I'm sure he wouldn't mind me saying, is the fact that you will get his best work out of him when he's enjoying himself, because he will sit there and he will just be like, I think this will be fun and I will enjoy this. And therefore, when he goes out and does it and people see him having fun, they then enjoy it, or they are then, in some cases, they do the reaction he wants to do based on how much he enjoys what he's doing. If he wants them to boo, he can get them to boo. But if he wants them to play along and laugh, he can get them to do that. I think when he's enjoying himself, that's just that spark. He's got such a fun, creative spark that not necessarily few people don't have, but maybe people don't know how to unleash as effectively as he does.
No question that I've kind of felt that in the past year of speaking with different wrestlers and managers, I feel like he's the one that can get the most out of the audience, the most out of the crowd. And he's the guy that just knows how to be able to draw attention. He has a certain charisma toward him. So there's no question that whether you see him dressing up as the Grinch or you see him with other different wrestlers out there, the guiding light Isaiah Quinn is definitely one of the guys I'm keeping an eye on here. And another guy that we're keeping an eye on here for 2022, and we're expecting big things from, of course, is Tom McManus, who is doing a phenomenal job with Pinfall Pro Wrestling, Top Rope, Unstoppable. You name a place, he'll be there. We have another 20 or 25 or so minutes with him. It is a tremendous honor to speak with him. And you can follow him again on Twitter at Tom McWrestle Pro. And he's only got Twitter. He doesn't have Instagram. He doesn't have Facebook. He doesn't have TikTok. He doesn't have YouTube. It's just Twitter. So everybody has Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, Facebook, LinkedIn, all those other places. He's on just one place. So it's very easy, very easy to remember to follow him, Tom McWrestle Pro, also Pinfall Pro. Also, please give them a follow because the company will be doing some huge things, some huge events coming up here starting in March. And listen, March isn't that far away. I know in New York today, it's been very cold. It's been a very tough winter so far, but we're going to get there. And Pinfall and Tom McManus are going to be a huge part while we're going to have a very, very big 2022. And I am the host of the Sports Report and the station manager here of Sportswire Radio, the Reverend Tom Bryson. Tom, I got to ask you then, what are your goals in wrestling for 2022?
I'm trying to think of a nice way to say this. I don't have any. I don't have goals.
Tell me why, because you're
I don't have a bucket list. I don't have.
Tell me why though,
because
goals. You're the first person. I've been asking. I've been doing this 3 years, and for 3 years, we'd always ask people, "Well, what is your goals upcoming?" You're the first person that told me. And I've done about 500 interviews or so with all walks of life, not just wrestling. I do politicians, I do universities, I do professional athletes. You name a person, I talk to them. You're the first person I can think of that said they don't have any goals. Talk to me why.
I'm very much at a point with wrestling where I'm like, I'm doing this because I enjoy it. If I put pressure on it, if I sit down and be like, this is it, this is going to be the year that I get a contract. This is going to be the year that I'm full with a full booking diary every single weekend. Every single space that I can have is going to be dedicated to wrestling. If that makes me miserable, if that doesn't go the way that I don't think, then that will end it for wrestling for me, probably. And I enjoy wrestling too much at this point to put it in a position where I'm happy for it to end. I'm in a point where I'm reasonably comfortable that I'm doing my best work I've ever done. I personally don't think I can get any better without a contract of some kind, or to be in a place that's run by people with a greater level of experience than what's out there to myself. People may roll their eyes at that. People may have something to say about that. But that's currently how I feel at the moment in regards to everything. Where I'm at, like I'm comfortable in a place of like where I'm doing stuff that I have goals aside of everything. Like I will get. I'm very determined to get on the property ladder this year. I'm very determined that this is going to be the year where I actually make a like a financial point of getting a house and everything like that. So, um, I have ideas, I have plans, but I don't have goals, I don't have targets because then I can't not hit those targets, and it doesn't matter too much. If something comes my way, that's not to say that I'm like actively not turning down anything or being like, oh, don't come to me, I don't want to do it. I want to do it. If you've got something, by all means, let's talk about it, and stuff like that. Like I'm open to ideas, and I'm always suggesting stuff to people that I'm working with and stuff like that. Like I'm pitching Unstoppable ideas, because I love Unstoppable, and I want to do more work with those guys. But when it comes to like an actual goal and a target in mind, like if something comes my way, I'm going to take it. But I'm going to take it if it's right for me, and I'm going to take it and make sure that this carries on my enjoyment.
Listen, that's fair. There was a singer for a band, Queensryche, and the singer was Jeff Tate at the time, and they asked him kind of the same thing. And he said at one time, well, if you ask me to do something, almost I get boxed in. So maybe it's like the same for you. You don't want to be boxed into something because you know what? When you say goals, that's your destination. That's
Yeah,
your endpoint. But who really knows? Listen, you're right now having the best time in the wrestling world.
yeah,
It
I'm
might even
having the
get
best
better.
time I've ever had. So
Yeah. So
I'm every show is more enjoyable than the last. So why stop it there? Why end it there? Why put why put a label on something that if I don't make it, that's a failure in my eyes. I'm a success in my eyes at the moment. I don't
I
want to
think you're
continue to
certainly a
fail.
success. I mean,
Yeah,
listen, you're out there each and every week. You're out there each and every month with all these different companies. Your involvement with the Sheik. I mean, all the different things that you've done. I mean, listen, how many people can say that they started life late in terms of getting into professional wrestling, becoming a successful manager, helping out at a company like in Top Rope, Unstoppable. Pinfall speaks for itself what you've done there. I mean, how can anybody say that you're a failure? Just because somebody doesn't make WWE or AEW or Impact doesn't mean you failed. It just means that there are different destinations for people in life. So I would say that you're not a failure. You're the
mm.
complete opposite of it. And listen, you have a master's anyway, so you could always pull up a piece of paper and say, "Listen, I got a master's. What do you have?" So at the end of the day, you have a lot. You have a lot of feathers in your cap. So I would definitely not worry about that. But I do want to talk about sort of in a way Pinfall, but it's not quite Pinfall, but it's going to be a big match that's upcoming here in a few weeks. And I think you know what I'm talking about here. And that's Franco Varga versus Big T. And Big T is somebody we know very well. I mean, this is a match here that's going to be. You want to talk about Brock versus Bobby? You want to talk about Seth and Roman? You want to talk about the Royal Rumble? Well, the two of these behemoths in the ring, we're probably talking about 600 plus pounds between them. We're talking about two of the biggest big men in the professional wrestling world, and it's going to happen here at the biggest date ever. It's going to be February the 13th. I mean, like I said, I'm not even focused on the Royal Rumble right now. I'm not even focused on Brock and Bobby. I want to see Franco and Big T, and this is truly a international matchup here. This is a big deal, my friend. Set the tables for us February the 13th. Biggest date ever.
I think this is going to be a really great show. Yeah, I think this is in a sort of, as far as I'm aware, it's in association with Fight TV. Franco's got a deal with Fight. He's bringing them down to the Salford Gymnastics Centre, the Salford Lifestyle Centre, where Pinfall is based. Pinfall has basically just provided the venue. They've said, go ahead, put a show on, and put it on Fight. I think it's going to be a great stuff. I think there's people been announced via the posters. I think Franco and Big T's the only match that's been announced so far, to
You
my
don't need
knowledge.
anything else
But
between
you
Franco
don't
and Big
need
T.
anything. You don't. It's the biggest match ever. I think that's going to be a great contest. I think that's going to be a really, really great contest to witness just by itself. But I will say this as well. I think the card that's about to be announced is probably going to be fantastic, and it's going to blow everything else out of the water in terms of what's going on at the moment in terms of pro wrestling. I think it's going to be a great show.
I gotta ask you, and we're gonna promote this event here for a few minutes, and it's maybe off the topic, but it actually is related to the topic. You've been a part of some big matches. You've obviously been involved with the Sheik, but Franco Varga and Big T. Big T is a very, 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 very accomplished wrestler, one of the most accomplished big men I think to come out of the UK and a part of our scene for over a decade. In fact, I was actually watching one of a match that he was actually a part of with a guy, Wildfire Nate Reese, that he was in the ring with against Soner Durson. We're talking like 14, 15 years ago, because Wildfire Nate Reese, we deal with each and every week. He's a part of the Sportswire radio team. We talk about the LWF and everything else. So Big T's been around a long time. You've been a part of some big matches. Is this arguably going to be one of the biggest matches you've been ever a part of in terms of at least witnessing?
Oh, I think in terms of witnessing, I think the thing with T, and I think everyone always forgets this. T gets better and better every year that he's here. T never slows down. He gets constantly better every single year. He becomes a more accomplished wrestler, a more accomplished talent every single year that he steps in. He's always looking at ways to up his game. He's always looking at new ways to get better. He's always thinking about stuff. And I think people always let that slip. But I think some people think T relies on his size. I think some people think T relies on his strength. T is a lot smarter than people give him credit for. And I think that's something that's going to be really come into play with this. If Franco doesn't forget that T's a smart guy, Franco's going to be someone who could be very much in trouble here.
And I gotta say it because obviously we kind of heard a little bit of Big T on the Guiding Light Isaiah Quinn's radio show, but I don't know if Mr. Varga knows what he's up against when it comes to Big T. I know that he's been in the ring with a who's who of people. I know that his ring work is accomplished and he's a decorated wrestler. He's from our end of things here in the United States and not too far from me. He's a Philadelphia-based guy. So I know what he's done in his career. I know what he's accomplished. But I almost think, in a sense, Tom, Franco may not realize what he's up against, what he's competing with when it comes to Big T. You think that's fair to say?
I think it may be possible. I think he should get fair warning. Like I say, like T's someone who has a very, very clear understanding of professional wrestling. T understands how professional wrestling works, and I think people don't necessarily recognize that sometimes. I think people let that slip. That T has been around for a long time. T has picked up a lot of experience, and T knows exactly where it's at when it comes to pro wrestling. And I think people forget that sometimes. So I think Franco, if Franco thinks he can just go in there and just work a big guy match, I think Franco's got another thing coming, because T doesn't just work big guy matches. He's a smart guy.
Ooh, ladies and gentlemen, I'm already fired up because February 13th is not that far from now. We're only 3.5 weeks away. So if you've got, 10 pounds, 12 pounds, 15 pounds, whatever it is, make sure you find a way to go and buy a ticket to this match. Because again, you don't need any other match when you're talking about Franco Varga and Big T. Again, Brock and Bobby have nothing on these guys. If you're focused on the Royal Rumble, I got news for you. You're going to definitely want to put that to the side when these two get in the ring. Big T, we know what he can do in the ring. Franco Varga, we definitely know what he can do in the ring. And you're going to want to find out more information on this. You can go to Pinfall Pro. You can also go to Tom McManus' page on Twitter at Tom McWrestle Pro. Also give a follow to Big T Justice. Also Franco Wrestles. Make sure you find a way to get more information on this card. The biggest date ever. And listen, in America, that's the day of the Super Bowl. So I couldn't think of a better day. You got the Super Bowl. You got Vargo and Big T. And you know what? I'm going on the record here as the host of the Sports Report and the station manager here of Sportswire Radio, the Reverend Tom Bryson. We've had some big feuds. We've had some big interviews. We've had some big people on this show over the past 3 years. I think right now I'm more excited about Franco Varga and Big T than the Super Bowl and the Royal Rumble combined, because like I said, the Super Bowl now means nothing. It means peanuts compared to Varga and Big T. I mean, listen, I'm pumped. I'm ready to go. You don't even need anything else. This is going to be the match I can guarantee when it comes to 2022. You're going to be focused on. I got a feeling Tom McManus is going to be a big part of this event. I don't know what Tom's going to do. I don't know what Tom's going to be a part of. But I will tell you that you're going to find a way to get out and get more information on this. And I'll ask you one more question on this before we get into a few other things. To anybody that might be thinking of going February 13th, biggest date ever, give me one reason they should come out.
It's the biggest show ever. It's the biggest show ever you're gonna see. How can you miss something that's been pitched to you as the biggest show ever? And we've proved it in that we've got the biggest match ever on the biggest show ever, and you're gonna get exactly that.
Well, that's all I need, ladies and gentlemen. I mean, I was sold anyway. When I saw Franco and Big T on the poster, I was sold anyway. But I figured, as we like to do with everybody else, give me one reason, give me one closing point. And I think that we've closed the deal. I think we know that February 13th is coming, and anything we can do to promote the card, we'll be happy to do that here. And Tom, before I get some closing thoughts and a few other things from you, I see you everywhere on podcasts. I see you in all these different shows. It's almost like you're almost like the go-to guy. You're almost like the hired gun when it comes to podcasting. So, I mean, thankfully, we're radio. We're sort of a notch above those things with all all respect to those great shows, obviously. But I have to ask you, I mean, you do all these different shows. Have you ever wanted to do your own show? Have you ever wanted to say, you know what? Because, again, I catch you, whether it's the Suplex Retweet show or whether it's obviously with Quinn's and everybody else. I mean, is it something that you'd want to do to get off your chest? Because it's almost like a common theme. You know, when you were doing it with Quinn like 3 years ago, I've been doing it 3 years ago. Everybody was like, podcasting was a weird term. It was like nobody really knew. Now it's like everybody and their mother. I was speaking to a 70-year-old lady on the phone yesterday, an inventor that's talking about doing a podcast. 3 years ago, you would have thought when you were doing it, when I was starting out, people would have said, what's a podcast? Now everybody and their mother can do a podcast. I mean, is it something that you would like to do because of all the guest spots you've been on, all the different shows you're a part of?
I don't think I'd set up a podcast now.
Okay.
Just because
it's not cool anymore.
Everybody's doing it. It was the time to get in. It was a few years ago.
Yeah, when we were starting out, it was like a big deal. I remember, buying the sound mic. I remember buying the mixer, the headphones, and it was like, now it's like all you need is Zoom.
Yeah, it's certainly. I mean, to be fair, it was always reasonably accessible. I mean, we were very fortunate in the fact that I knew someone who could use the studios at Salford University, so we always had a studio that we could record in. But we always had backup ideas and stuff like. Even 3 years ago, iPhones were good enough to record a podcast on. Like they were always. It's going that way now, where you'll be able to do anything, and it's good that it's accessible for people to do everything. I'm always like it. I occasionally think about doing some more media stuff. I have sort of a very clear idea of what I'd sort of like to do, but I don't think I have the time to do it, and I don't think I have the resources to do it. I'd love to do. I was a big fan of things like ride along and table for free on the.
I was watching that the other night. It was it was the Nation. It was Mark Henry. It was the Godfather and D'Lo Brown. Then they had one with Farouk, and I always liked those table for free segments.
I always thought that was such a good concept. The idea of people sitting down and doing stuff, and just talking, because that's the. I remember what I watched the new Harry. It's not wrestling related, but the new Harry Potter thing.
Okay.
That's just come out on. We got it on Now TV or something like that. I don't know if it actually got broadcast in the States. Like the 20-year anniversary of Harry Potter, and it's a good little documentary, but there are parts of it where it's Daniel Radcliffe going around and sitting down with people from the movies and having discussions. And I was like, that's a more interesting show than what you've made as a documentary. Daniel Radcliffe going down and sitting things and being like, this was my experience of making the films. What was your experience of making the films? And I'd love to do something like that. Or I've always said as well, there was a show over here on the UK called The Trip. That was two British comedians. Steve Coogan, you'll probably have heard of over there.
Yeah.
I don't know about Rob Brydon, Welsh comic.
No, Steve
Yeah,
Coogan.
I don't think he's trying. It was Steve Coogan and another British comedian, a Welsh comedian called Rob Brydon, and they were basically doing a trip of like restaurants throughout parts of England, and then they went to Italy in the second series. And it was like part scripted, part improvised, of them just talking while they were having a meal. And I'm like, to me, that's a concept that I was like, that'd work so well. Because it's basically just this, but you're also doing it and putting it into a new format of talking about things. And I'm like, if I was ever going to do something, that's what I want to do. And if I can't make it good, I'm not going to make it. So it depends. If I ever have the time, if I ever have the resources to do it, then I'll do it. But it's one of them. If I can't make it and know it's going to be good, I'm not going to make it.
Yeah, I feel like you have to do something. It
Yeah.
has to stand out. Like, I feel like what Quinn is doing is kind of different than like what everybody else is doing. So I feel like if you're starting out, you have to do something that's like out of the box, because otherwise everybody does a podcast. Like, when I started, it was 3 years ago. So I have that tenure in there, and I've done different things, and I had a vision, kind of like with what you're having. So I kind of think like in order to be successful, you've got to like differentiate yourself. And I think at the end of the day, I was sold on Table for Three because you got a free meal. So I figured out you're having a meal, you're sitting there, you're having a drink. I mean, listen, I'm all in. I mean, I even think the Broken Skull sessions are kind of cool too, where Stone Cold speaks with somebody he wrestled against, or somebody is a contemporary. I always thought that was pretty cool. Also,
who would have had Stone Cold as one of the best interviewers that wrestling has ever produced?
I never would have thought that.
That guy is so good at interviewing people. It is unreal.
You know who I would have thought would have been good? You know who I would have thought been good? I would have thought Mick Foley would have been good at that. I did not think Stone Cold. When I was growing up, I didn't think Stone Cold would sit there like this for 2.5 hours and ask wrestlers all their whole different stories. I never would have guessed that, because it was pretty much like flip the bird, Stone Cold Stunner, and said, "Oh, hell yeah," and then what? And then that was it. Who would have guessed that Stone Cold would be literally like, he would even sit there in some of these sessions and have notes. Like, he was like really like a journalist. Who would have guessed that?
He does his research. Can you imagine sitting there watching Stone Cold with his little reading glasses on, going through the notes?
I would never have guessed. Jericho, I could have saw Jericho because Jericho was kind of like, he was always like a little bit like of a free spirit where he did different things. But Stone Cold, I just never would have guessed that in a million years, man.
No, it's crazy, but those sessions are so good. They're so brilliant in terms of how well researched they are, and that he's such a good interviewer. And that baffles me. That's the one thing. Like, that's the one thing I'll always take pride from wrestling, is the fact that like Stone Cold was the best actual sit-down interviewer I've ever seen in my life.
Well, I think it's hands down. I mean, I've listened to Jericho, and I like Jericho, but Stone Cold, it's like he could sit there for like 2.5 to 3 hours, and even if he didn't wrestle that person, he could talk to them, and like they're just like laid back, down to earth people. And it's like you're able to just like really get to know that person in a way that you would never have guessed in a million years. I was listening to the last one he did with DDP, and it was like, I didn't know like half these things, because like I never was one of those people that would kind of sit there and I have to know every little thing about the wrestler, like how can I call it, like the dirt sheets they would call it, right? I always looked at it like I want to watch and just absorb and enjoy it. I mean, sure, there are some things that kind of sprinkle in now because professional wrestling and that kind of line, it's kind of less blurred than it was like certainly when I started watching 20 years ago. But the fact of the matter is, I don't like to pretend I know every single wrestler. I like to enjoy watching it. And I think that's what I appreciate about what Stone Cold does. It's like telling a story. It's allowing you to get to know that person. It's almost like a better version of what in America we used to have, the A&E biographies of professional wrestlers. And they were good. Don't get me wrong. But it was almost like the wrestler in their words, but not everything was told. Stone Cold's giving you like the whole unfiltered thing in a way that it's not talking down at you. It's almost like very enjoyable. So listen, Tom, I would never have guessed that. But listen, stranger things have happened in this world, and I have a feeling stranger things will continue to happen. But it's obviously been a tremendous honor, and I can't thank you enough for this opportunity. But I like to ask this question to everybody that's been on with me. It doesn't matter who they are, what they are, when they are here, and yada, yada, yada. I like to ask you, for your career, you've done a lot of big things. You've been a part of a lot of moments. I'd like to ask you, though, especially for those that are watching and listening to this for the first time, for you, is there one or two moments in your wrestling career that stand out most?
Yeah, I think I've got two moments of it. I think for me, one thing that really stands out for me is the moment that it clicked for the first time. I remember working on, I must have been like 2-3 years in at this point, and I'd done plenty of managing, and I think I was just doing a Gulver's show, one of those weekends at Gulver's, and we had a full house in, and they were going for it, and I was enjoying it, and it just clicked. Everything just clicked, and I was like, right, this is how you do it. This is how you do it every single time. And I think that was a big. I think that's a moment that's always going to stick with me. Just the moment that everything clicks into place, and I was like, I fully understand it now. Second would be I'm very fortunate in that I met my partner through pro wrestling. I'm very fortunate that not only has wrestling given me everything that I've ever sort of like wanted from like a performance perspective. I've now met the person that I feel like I'm ready to settle down with and spend the rest of my life with. So I'll be forever grateful for wrestling for that. Yeah.
Oh, well, mazel tov. I mean, I am
thank you very much.
So congratulations. I mean, obviously, theoretically, I could marry you, but obviously, congratulations. So no seriousness. I mean, I don't think I could top that. Listen, if somebody says, "Hey, I'm going to meet somebody that I'm going to wind up and marry and such," I'd say, "Well, you know what? Forget about all the wins and losses. Forget about all the
exactly."
I say, you know what? Listen, that takes the cake. So obviously, on a personal note, listen. I mean, that's the best. That's the best story I could probably have said I've heard here. I don't think I've heard one of those like that they, that's where their best moments. So you know what, I can't top that. So obviously you certainly know how to go out with a blaze of glory and go out with a bang here. And obviously it's definitely been a tremendous honor. I'd love to have you come on and talk about anything else that you're working on, or anything you were promoting, because I really think you're doing a lot of big things, and I'd like to be a part of it. And I think that the professional wrestling scene here in the UK is going to continue to explode, and I think that we've gotten a small taste of that. And Tom, I want to give you now the floor. I want to give you any closing thoughts. Anything you want to say to anybody that's watching or listening to this, or anything else you want to plug, or Twitter, whatever else is on your mind. And I can't thank you enough for this opportunity.
Oh, no, thank you.
God,
thank you.
Floor is yours.
Been a genuine pleasure. I'll put forward, I believe PCW have a show this Friday. I'll be there doing a few little bits and bobs backstage and just helping out with the crew. Just lending a helping hand where I can. So that's going to be a great show to come down. They'll have their annual Road for Glory tournament coming up very soon. Obviously, biggest battle ever in the 13th of February. That's going to be brilliant. Top Rope is the 18th of February. I think they've got a training show on. That's going to be phenomenal. Unstoppable, I believe I have just confirmed with them that I'll be there for the 5th of March. Unstoppable. Burnley is by and large my favorite town to work in at the moment. If you haven't been to an Unstoppable British wrestling show, go to an Unstoppable British wrestling show. They are phenomenal. The crowd there is like nothing you have ever seen before, and they will draw you in, and they will suck you in to the madness that is an Unstoppable British wrestling show. 5th of March, those shows are going to be amazing, I think, for the next few years. Yeah.
Well, I got a feeling then before March 5th, we got to get you on to talk about what's going to go on in that big event there for Top Rope Wrestling, because it's going to be a big day March 5th. We know that KOW is back March 5th. We have Top Rope that's back. So I think we're going to get you back on here in the
I
coming
think we
weeks.
definitely need to, yeah.
I'm looking forward to that because we love talking about different wrestling companies here. So you got my palate wet. You've got me excited. You've got me fired up because we love those things. And, of course, February the 13th, we're also pumped up for also as well when it comes to Franco Varga and Big T. Like I said, forget about the Rumble. Forget about Brock and Bobby. Forget about the Super Bowl. We got the championship match here. It's going to be one of the biggest matches of the year upcoming in 2022. And I even got a comment here real quick from one of my friends that was actually watching this on Facebook, and he's very religious. He's Orthodox Jewish, and he said that maybe we can have a wrestling show in his area because they're Orthodox Jewish. The joke is they don't really like no wrestling, but I kind of said, well, do you have any professional wrestlers that you'd like to come to wrestle in your town? And he doesn't have that, but he did watch and he appreciates you coming on and he liked what you had to say. So at least we gave you a new fan. So that's why we like to do the different streams, because there's always somebody out there that we can kind of pick up while they're kind of watching us talk and going on. And it's always about getting new people into wrestling. That's why I like to do the different streams. But Tom, my friend, it is a tremendous honor. I can't thank you enough for this opportunity. I'm looking forward to speaking with you here in the next few weeks. I'm looking forward to speaking with you about all the great things that you were doing. And I can't thank you enough for this opportunity. And congratulations on all the success personally with the Masters, also getting married, and also
sorry, just before I get, I'm not getting married. I might get married. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, let's not spill the beans on that too far.
So we'll say congratulations on the Masters and congratulations on meeting your partner. So let's put it that way.
Yeah.
And we're looking forward to a big 2022 from you. So we'll definitely we'll go back and try to edit that out. But obviously, I can't thank you enough, my friend. We'll speak with you soon.
Thank you so much, man. Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure.
As we're here on the Sports Report, the number one global sports show with one of the top pro wrestling managers around here, and that's Tom McManus, who's a part of Pinfall Pro Wrestling, Top Rope Pro Wrestling, Unstoppable Pro Wrestling. He'll be a part of the biggest date ever event, February the 13th. He'll also be a part of March 5th's huge Top Rope Wrestling event in Burnley. Very, very excited about that and much, much more. You can follow Tom on Twitter at Tom McWrestlePro. Also, please follow Pinfall Pro Wrestling on Twitter as well at Pinfall Pro. I am the host of the Sports Report, the station manager here of Sportswire Radio, the Reverend Tom Bryce. If you're on sportnarium.com/player, you'll get your regularly scheduled programming here in about a half an hour or so from now. We'll have on the Pinstripe Chronicles as they'll give their take on all the latest happenings in the world of professional sports. If you're with us on Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube, we'll be back here Saturday morning British Standard Time, Friday night New York time. We'll be talking all things related here in the world of sports, so stay tuned to that. We'll also be back on sportnarium.com/player. We'll be speaking all things related here to the LWF 10 p.m. British Standard Time. We'll be speaking with Bob Costin, Wildfire Nate Reese, and the Asset Stephen Cross, so stay tuned for that. I am the host of the Sports Report and the station manager here of Sportsfire Radio. Good night, everybody. I am the Reverend Tom Bryce on sportnarium.com/player. Thank you for listening. Thank you for viewing on Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube. And good night, everybody. Okay, so let's go disconnect here. And